For years, Phil had been documenting his solo hiking and camping trips, sharing the beauty of the wilderness with his audience. But on one particular night in 2021, what started as a peaceful journey into the Appalachian Trail became something far more sinister. As Phil made his way deeper into the trail, something strange caught his eye. Scattered along the path, half buried in the dirt, were old plastic containers. These weren't just pieces of litter, they had something written on them. The writings were unsettling, entire poems scrawled onto the plastic in crude, jagged handwriting, lyrics from songs, bizarre, rambling messages. Who would go through the effort of writing these, and then discard them here? The words were cryptic. The dead watch, they listened from the trees. Phil pressed on, brushing off the unease. But as he neared his intended campsite, things only got worse. Just off the trail lay a dead duck, its neck twisted unnaturally. And beside it, another message. This wasn't just a prank. The notes, the cryptic writing, and now the dead animal, it all felt deliberate. Intentional. Then, the most chilling part. There was a fire still burning at a nearby campsite. A small tarp-covered area, a flickering orange glow, but no one around. Phil wasn't alone on the trail. As he debated what to do, two hikers, a pair of women, approached with their dog, but instead of a casual greeting, they were visibly shaken. One of them asked a question that sent a chill down his spine. "Have you seen the guy?" Phil hesitated, then told them about the tarp, the fire, and the notes. The moment he mentioned the fire still burning, one of the women paled. They urged him to turn back with them, to leave before it got dark. Phil took their advice. Further along the trail, he found an old shelter, a common resting spot for hikers. Inside, he discovered a logbook, a place where travelers leave messages, updates, and warnings. As he flipped through the pages, his blood ran cold. The same handwriting, the same strange, rambling words, the same name over and over again, warnings. Then, a sudden sharp bang on the shelter's roof. Phil froze. Silence followed. Then, a single footstep outside, and from the darkness, a light, a headlamp flickering between the trees. Someone was out there, walking, watching. Whoever it was had followed him, the same man who wrote the notes, the same one who left the duck, and now, he was outside. Phil didn't wait to find out who it was. He packed up in silence, careful not to make a sound. Then, gripping his flashlight tight, he bolted. Back toward the main trail, back toward safety. He kept looking back, convinced he was being followed. But the only thing behind him was darkness. He made it back, safe. But as of 2024, Phil has never spoken about the man in the woods again. Don't go looking for what you don't want to find. Camping alone can be peaceful. The sound of a crackling fire, the scent of pine in the air, the quiet solitude. But when you're alone in the wilderness, you never really know who or what might find you. Gaz, an experienced outdoorsman, had spent years documenting his solo camping trips. His channel was filled with footage of him braving extreme weather, navigating dense forests, and encountering wild animals. But on a cool evening in April 2023, it wasn't an animal that found him. That evening, everything was going according to plan. He pitched his tent, chopped some wood, and prepared his dinner over an open flame. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, he was no longer alone. A man emerged from the shadows, jeans, a heavy coat, his face partially obscured by the dim firelight. He stepped closer, then spoke. "Got anything for me, mate? Food? A drink?" Gaz was taken aback. He was miles from the nearest town. No other campers were nearby. So, where had this man come from? Not wanting to be rude or provoke him, Gaz cautiously offered him a beer and some food. The man sat down without hesitation, staring into the fire as he ate. For the next hour they talked, or rather, the man talked, and Gaz listened. "I ruined my life with drugs. Lost everything. I walk these woods now, just walking, never stopping. There was something off about the way he spoke, a vacant, detached tone, as if he was reciting lines from a story he'd told 1,000 times before. Gaz turned away for just a moment, to toss a log onto the fire, and when he turned back, the man was gone. No goodbyes, no footsteps fading into the distance, just gone. His dog, Fendi, whined, staring into the woods, ears perked, rigid. Something didn't feel right. It wasn't just the man's sudden disappearance. It was the way he had spoken, the way he had watched Gaz, the way he had waited before vanishing into the night. Gaz wasn't going to risk staying the night. He quickly packed his gear, doused the fire, and hiked back to his car. But before leaving, he left a trail camera behind, just in case the man returned. The next morning, Gaz returned. The campsite was untouched. No sign of the man. No footprints in the soft dirt. He reached for the trail camera, hoping it had caught something. But there was one problem. The camera was gone. Whoever the man was, he hadn't just disappeared. He had come back. He had known about the camera, and he had taken it. And to this day, Gaz never saw him again. The wilderness at night is a different world. The darkness plays tricks on your mind, twisting familiar sounds into whispers, harmless shadows into lurking figures. But sometimes, the fear isn't in your imagination. Sometimes, something is really there. In October 2022, a YouTuber known as Creepy Outdoors ventured into a remote forest, documenting the eerie silence of nature at night. But what he captured instead was something no one could explain. For the first 13 minutes of the video, nothing happened. Then at exactly 13 minutes and 7 seconds, everything changed. A distant whisper, "I see you." He stopped walking, tightened his grip on his flashlight, then silence. He turned his light off, just for a moment. Then it happened again. "I see you." The voice hadn't spoken when his flashlight was on. It had waited. A branch snapped. Something was watching. Something intelligent enough to wait for the perfect moment to reveal itself. He turned and walked calmly at first, but then, "I see you." It was right behind him. He started running. Footsteps followed. Something big. He didn't stop until he reached his car, locked the doors, turned the camera toward the tree line. Nothing. Then, a loud thud. A single smeared handprint on the car window, but there was no one outside. The video ended there. No explanation, no follow-up, just questions. Who was in the woods that night, and if he hadn't run, what would have happened? I see you. The woods at night are supposed to be quiet, a place of peace. But sometimes, silence isn't comforting, it's unnatural. Because when the forest goes quiet, it usually means something is lurking. In January 2024, a YouTuber named Sam set out for a stealth camping trip deep in the Cleveland woods. He had done this dozens of times before, packing light, setting up camp far from any trails, and documenting his experience. Everything seemed normal, at first. But as night fell, Sam began to feel it. That strange instinctual awareness, like he wasn't alone. It started subtly. A faint crunch of leaves somewhere beyond the trees, too deliberate to be the wind, too slow to be an animal. Sam listened. One step, then another. But as soon as he turned his flashlight toward the sound, it stopped. Maybe it was just his imagination. Maybe the woods were playing tricks on him. But then, another step. Closer this time. Every time he moved, it stopped. Every time he went still, it began again. The footsteps were following his own rhythm. Sam wasn't alone. And whatever was out there, it was waiting. Still, he told himself it was nothing. The mind plays tricks in the dark. So, forcing himself to ignore the feeling, he climbed into his tent, zipped it shut, and tried to sleep. Hours passed. The forest outside remained unnervingly quiet. No wind, no insects. Just stillness. Then a single slow footstep outside the tent. Then, Another. Sam held his breath, listening. His mind raced. It had to be an animal, right? A deer, a fox? But then, he heard something that made his stomach drop. A soft exhale, a deliberate human breath just beyond the tent wall. The fabric shifted slightly as if something brushed against it. He wasn't alone. And whoever was out there was right outside his tent. Hello? Who's there? A long, painful silence stretched between him and the thing outside. Then, a response. A slow, drawn-out inhale like someone breathing deeply through their nose. Enough was enough. He burst out of the tent, flashlight in hand, ready to confront whoever or whatever was there. The light scanned the trees, but there was nothing. No footprints, no movement, just the emptiness of the woods. Just as he was about to turn back to camp, "I see you." Sam swung the flashlight wildly, just in time to catch a dark figure moving between the trees. Panic surged through him. He ran. He didn't stop until he reached his van, throwing himself inside and locking the doors. His hands shook as he grabbed the camera, flipping it toward the trail one final time. The forest was empty, or so he thought. A loud bang. Something slammed against the passenger side window. A single smeared handprint on the glass. There was someone out there that night, someone who had been following him, and someone who wanted him to know it. Camping in your van offers the best of both worlds, the comfort of a locked door and the freedom of the open road. But what if that locked door wasn't as safe as you thought? In February 2024, a solo camper named Sean set out for a weekend getaway. His van was stocked, his bed was warm, and the remote location he had chosen was perfect, secluded, quiet, miles away from any major town. By the time he settled in, the night was cold and quiet, just the way he liked it. Sometime after midnight, Sean woke up to the faint sound of a car pulling up in the distance. At first it didn't seem unusual, maybe another camper, a late-night traveler. But then, he heard them. Soft footsteps on gravel, slow, measured, moving around the van. A shadow moved past the window. The silhouette lingered for a moment, then disappeared. Sean didn't move. He barely breathed. He listened. The footsteps circled the van once, then again, before finally stopping near the driver's side door. A faint tapping, not knocking, just tapping. Then, the sound of a car door opening, a second person stepping out. Then came the sound that sent a chill through Sean's entire body, the unmistakable zip of plastic ties tightening around his van's door handles. Sean was trapped. His breathing quickened. He lifted his phone. No signal. Someone, or multiple people, were outside, deliberately sealing him inside his own van. For minutes, long, agonizing minutes, Sean stayed completely still, listening for any sign of movement. But the scariest part? Whoever was outside wasn't leaving. The minutes crept by. 3:12 a.m., 3:28 a.m., 3:41 a.m., still no movement. Then, a faint tap, tap, tap against the back of the van. It wasn't an attempt to break in, it wasn't a robbery, it was something else. They were waiting. For what? Sean had no idea, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to wait to find out. With no signal, no weapon, and no idea how many people were out there, Sean had one choice. He had to break free before it was too late. With painstaking slowness, he moved to the driver's seat, knife in hand. He pressed the blade against the plastic tie, careful, deliberate, sawing just enough to weaken it. The soft sawing of a knife against plastic, his heavy breathing. Then, snap! One zip tie broke. He didn't wait for the rest. The moment he was free, he turned the key and slammed his foot on the gas. The engine roared to life. Tires spun against gravel. He sped away, leaving the darkness behind. Sean drove for miles before stopping, his body shaking, his mind racing. He looked at his phone, still no signal, but at least he was away from there. It wasn't until sunrise that he finally had the nerve to check the outside of his van. That's when he saw them. The zip ties were still hanging from the other door handles, tight, thick, stronger than before. Someone had planned this. Someone had done this before. And the worst part? He never saw their faces. He never heard their voices. He never knew how many of them there were. And if he hadn't woken up when he did, what were they planning to do next? A seasoned hiker and YouTuber, Daniel had always enjoyed solo camping trips in remote areas. He loved the peace, the isolation, and the thrill of the unknown. His channel was filled with footage of him setting up camp, cooking over an open fire, and sharing survival tips. But one particular trip in September 2023 changed everything. Daniel had chosen an uncharted part of the Pacific Northwest, deep, dense woods where few people dared to go. He was miles away from civilization, his only company being the towering trees and the distant calls of wildlife. That night, after setting up camp and recording a segment for his viewers, he crawled into his sleeping bag and shut off his camera. Everything was silent. The usual sounds of the forest, rustling leaves, chirping insects, the occasional distant howl, were oddly absent. Then, it started. The first scream. At first it was distant. A blood-curdling scream. Human, but not quite. A high-pitched wail, drawn out and distorted, echoing through the trees. Daniel shot up in his tent. His heart pounded. He fumbled for his flashlight and unzipped the tent door, scanning the dark woods. Nothing. Then, another scream. Closer. It didn't sound like an animal. It was too intelligent, too deliberate. It was almost mimicking human pain. He reached for his camera and turned it back on. If something was out there, he wanted proof. The footsteps. As he stepped outside, he heard twigs snapping. Something large was moving in the undergrowth. The footsteps weren't fast or panicked. They were slow, deliberate, as if whatever it was wanted him to hear it. Daniel held his breath, scanning the darkness. Then, a third scream. This time it was right behind him. The chase. He spun around, shining his light toward the sound. Nothing. No movement. No figures. No eyes reflecting in the dark. But then, branches snapped. Something was running toward him. His survival instincts kicked in. He grabbed his gear and bolted toward the main trail. The thing, whatever it was, followed. For nearly 5 minutes Daniel ran, panting, his camera still rolling. The footsteps behind him never slowed. It was matching his pace, staying just out of sight. Then, silence. He stopped, turned around. Nothing. Just trees. No movement. No breathing. No signs that anything had been chasing him. He waited, barely daring to breathe. Then, just as he took a step forward, go back. Daniel didn't hesitate. He ran, faster than before, until he reached his car. He jumped inside, locked the doors, and sat there, shaking. His camera was still recording, capturing the eerie silence. Then, one final scream, right outside the car window. But when he looked, there was no one there. Theories. The internet exploded with theories when Daniel uploaded the footage. People analyzed the sounds, the shadows, the footsteps, but no one could explain it. Here are some of the most common theories. Wendigo or skinwalker. Many believe the screams weren't human at all. In Native American folklore, wendigos and skinwalkers are creatures that mimic human voices to lure people deeper into the woods. The unnatural scream, the slow footsteps, and the whispered warning all match descriptions of these entities. A stalker or serial killer. Some suggest a far more human explanation. What if someone was out there? A hermit, a predator. The idea of a person intentionally terrifying campers is just as disturbing as any supernatural theory, lost soul or ghost. The forest could have been the site of a tragic death. Someone lost, someone who never made it out. Some believe Daniel captured evidence of a spirit forever screaming for help. Psychological effect. A few skeptics argue that isolation and fear can create auditory hallucinations, but could that explain the footsteps, the whisper, the final scream at his car, the aftermath? Daniel never returned to that forest. He still hikes, still camps, but never alone. And as for the footage, it remains one of the most unexplained, chilling encounters ever caught on camera. Camping is meant to be an escape, a return to nature, But as these stories prove, sometimes nature isn't what we should fear, because out in the wilderness, you are never truly alone. If you made it this far, you're braver than most. But tell me, would you still go camping after hearing these stories? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this descent into darkness, leave a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because next time, the horror might just be closer than you think.